You guys are bringing to mind for me the Library of Babel. There was a programmer who designed an algorithm that would create all possibilities of arranging 3,500 characters using the alphabet, period, comma, and a space. Which is to say that anything you could say with 3,500 characters is cataloged by a number and arranged in a digital library of hexagonal rooms with shelves and tome numbers. But the difference is these are only generated through an algorithm. Even though all possible combinations have been recorded, they haven't technically been said. And so that brings two minds to what you guys were talking about. One, using more characters, we can then say things that are not in the Library of Babel. And then secondly, just saying them has its own pertinence. That you were the person who brought this idea to another person. So I guess where I'm going with this is that language itself, although powerful, really is more or less a tool. And I think the Library of Babel explains that. So what's more pertinent is the fact that we are saying it. What are some ways you see us being able to speak to the world or just speaking to ourselves in our own lives?
I feel like a big part of what that implies is that there's this enormous super space of alternate things that could be said, alternate experiences that you might have that would lead to the things that you want to say. And so in some way we're always searching through our world for certain kinds of experiences, for certain opportunities, moments of expression and what have you. And so I mean, I guess I would say I'm very intrigued by the means that we have for navigating that super space, because it's enormous and there's just immeasurable magnitudes of alternate sentiments and statements that could be presented or projected out there in one way or another. And yet we happen upon one. You have a distinct point of view and you think things in a certain way, and you don't confuse or conflate certain things in your life. It's so easy for me to look around and recognize the distinct elements in the world. It's like how many different ways could I possibly see things relative to the number of ways that I see it?
And what comes up for me is I'm going to tie this to my programming, my expertise in programming, and it's with programming, it's a language that has a very limited, at least with computers, a very limited number of characters that you use, a very limited number of different syntaxes that you can use. The interesting thing, though, is at least when I program, I try to develop these common tools, essentially, like a tool chain that eventually builds up, and then I can do more complex things easier and faster. And in a way, I think that's how we have evolved our language. It's more nebulous with human language because there's so many more different combinations that can come up. But in a way, the language that we use and the words that we put together are based on this tool chain of what we've built up of a mental model of our world and how we want to try to express that to other people in this world. And as time goes on, as our mental model of the world changes, the language that we use changes and how we communicate with each other changes. And in a way, like, there's this type of communication, but as we've found since the advent of the internet, since the 90s, since it became more public, is there are multiple different ways to communicate. And in a way, it's like in programming and creating an application, you're opening up a new pathway for communication to occur at different levels. There's like the communication of sharing resources and links to people. That's a method that we can communicate with each other. It's a little bit more of a symbolic type of communication, but it's a type of communication that has evolved in our in our evolution of our view of the world and the tools that we have and the tools that we create in this world. And so I think it's incredibly important to work with this concept that communication isn't something that is on just the verbal layer that most people are aware of. And we were talking about this earlier in the podcast. It comes through in the intonations in our voice, in the hand gestures that we use, the emotions that we convey. So I think it's incredibly interesting to play in that realm of what it really means to communicate with another other.